Joining me now, Wisconsin Congressman and House Armed Services Committee member Mike Gallagher. Congressman, it's great to see you this morning. Your reaction to the back and forth between the United States and Saudi Arabia, who issued a scathing statement a couple of days ago, by the way, in response to the White House's interpretation of the production cut. And now it appears that, you know, they could be facing consequences. Where do we go from here?
Well, it's really embarrassing, and it just shows that this administration can't get a sense of who our friends are and who our enemies are in the Middle East, and it makes us look very weak on the world stage. But we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, this is the same administration that's been cynically releasing resources from the strategic petroleum reserves designed to buy votes for the midterms. But the reality here is that the Saudis aren't afraid of Biden's bluster or being scolded by Tony Blinken. They're afraid of the administration lifting sanctions on Venezuela. They're afraid of us unleashing the power of domestic energy production. And that fear caused them to take a much different approach under the Obama and Trump administrations, a market share approach as opposed to a price management approach. And that's really, quite frankly, why Biden is struggling so much with rampant inflation, much more than Obama did, because his energy policies are far more radical than Obama's, if you can believe it, which kind of gets to the bigger point here. Inflation is a policy choice. It's the chosen policy of the Democratic Party. Inflation is what happens when you ram through trillion-dollar spending bills, when you demonize domestic energy producers, when you try and squeeze out their capital with crazy ESG narratives. That is a policy choice, and hardworking Wisconsinites in my district are dealing with that very inept policy choice by the Biden administration.
And Congressman, even if he was moving forward with his green energy agenda, he could still unleash U.S. oil. I mean, Saudi Arabia wouldn't have been able to have this kind of control alongside Russia, by the way, if U.S. producers were pumping more. You know, production at 13 million barrels a day, roughly, saying, oh, well, we're back to where we were at the peak right before the pandemic, but we could be doing 2 or 2.5 million barrels more than that, and he simply won't allow that to happen in this country. And now not only do we have problems abroad with other nations, but we're getting into it back and forth with Saudi Arabia as well, with this potential threat, too, of, oh, we may cut off arms sales to them to punish them for this production cut. I mean, this is not going to lead to a good place.
No, I mean, you're 100% right. And I think that's what drives most common sense Americans crazy, right? The solution is sitting there right in front of our face. It's to unleash the power of domestic energy production. It's to stop demonizing domestic energy producers. And that's what the Biden administration is doing. They're blaming domestic producers as the president is going all over the world, begging Venezuela, begging Saudi Arabia. He's not going to Texas. He's not going to Louisiana. He's not going to domestic producers to ask them to ramp up production because he is beholden to John Kerry, AOC, and the radical Green New Deal wing of the party. It's a massive own goal on the world stage. It's undermining our broader foreign policy, as you alluded to. It's a massive gift to Vladimir Putin. It's the weak link in our entire strategy vis-a-vis Ukraine and Russia right now. So they need to change course. Otherwise, we're going to be in a very difficult situation. And in the Middle East, we've seen time and again, if you don't, again, as I started, if you don't have a good sense of friends and enemies, if you don't build off the framework of the Abraham Accords, which unites the Sunni Arab Gulf states with the Israelis in order to counter Iran, and if you don't have a sensible energy policy, you cannot have a coherent foreign policy more broadly.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, too, because after President Trump was elected in 2016, shortly after, just a month or so, is when Russia joined OPEC to become one of the OPEC plus nations that was involved with the cartel's decision-making process, because they knew President Trump was going to unleash the power of fracking and shale and all the resources that we had in this country. And they've been watching this for some time. Vladimir Putin has sat back and he knew this was coming. When you have the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and a country like Russia, they depend on their energy revenues for existence. You know, it's hard to imagine that they weren't watching this closely. And as soon as they saw this president step away from energy independence, they knew it was game on.
That's absolutely true. The other thing at play here, I think, you can't underestimate how big of a blunder it was for the administration to come in and try and resuscitate the lifeless corpse of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran deal, which, of course, you know, the long pole in the tent for all our allies in the region, the shared threat they all face is that of Iran. And this administration has been desperate to get a deal with Iran. They're willing to accept almost anything. It's actually the hardliners in Iran who won't take yes for an answer at this point right now, and that is a huge mistake, which is another reason why this relationship with Saudi Arabia has deteriorated so quickly, and that's bad for American foreign policy and American national security.
Congressman Joe Concha is going to jump in.
Sure. Two questions, Congressman. First, when a U.S. president asks a foreign entity to change its policy because we have an election coming up, isn't that collusion? That's number one. And number two, behind you, I see a Bart Starr jersey, and I know that obviously you represent Wisconsin, but I'm not recognizing the color since Bart played for the Packers. So you could explain that after you answer my first question.
Well, it must be the lighting. I'll answer the second one first, because it is green and gold, and Bart Starr is a hero of mine, and may he rest in peace. He did a lot for the community here, and his wife once saw me on Fox and gave me a nice call. Cherry Starr is a class act. Listen, the president, as Republicans argued when Democrats made these accusations against President Trump, the president does have enormous latitude when it comes to foreign policy. Obviously, we need to know more about the specifics of this situation before we run sort of with a collusion narrative. But I do think it raises serious concerns about the basic competence of this administration when it comes to foreign policy. As we've just been talking about, they don't seem to understand how energy markets work. They don't seem to understand how to do basic alliance management. They don't understand the basic alliance structure in the Middle East. And the thing is, what are we seeing throughout the Middle East? It's not just that traditional allies are growing weary of the Biden administration. It's that China is coming in to fill the void where we are opening up opportunities. China is playing a global game right now. They're playing global chess. Well, we're barely playing checkers right now, and that's a huge problem.
And they are watching this president, you know, and all his foreign policy blunders, and saying the same thing that Vladimir Putin did, that this is an opportunity. Congressman Mike Gallagher, great to see you this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.